Senator Bernie Sanders has released a sweeping new bill, a new climate plan that would create 20 million jobs and zero out emissions by the year 2050. So this is his Green New Deal legislation, and the plan is incredibly bold. So now let me give you some of the details here. This is from HuffPost. Sanders' plan vows to slash U.S. emissions 71% below 2017 levels by 2030, with using 100% renewable electricity and zero emissions vehicles. So investing heavily in solar, wind, geothermal energy, as well as, of course, electric cars. Uh, Now, along with that, he would go after the fossil fuel industry incredibly hard. He would ban fracking, drilling on public lands, and end all imports and exports of oil and gas, and would threaten companies with civil and criminal charges for any pollution and obstruction of climate action. He is not messing around on this. All right. Now, the plan also pledges to give $200 billion dollars to help developing countries reduce their own climate pollution by 36% in the next decade. Now, that's also important because one of the big arguments is, well, hey, look, why should we do this when China and India, they're promoting, they're doing a lot of pollution as well. Well, okay, well, now we're going to give these countries help in modernizing their systems and making sure. And there's another argument too that conservatives love to use, and it's, hey man, look, I understand that you want to ban fossil fuels and everything, and do something about climate change. But what about these developing countries that burn wood stoves, right? What about these developing countries that don't have access to solar energy? They're too poor. Well, Bernie Sanders says let's give them billions of dollars to help them modernize. Let's help them. And by the way, you would think, and this, a lot of people would think Costa Rica is one of the countries that fits that mold, right? That's they're poor and they can't afford to modernize. No, they actually went full. They're actually planning to go full solar. I don't quite remember what year they plan to go full solar, but they are rapidly modernizing their energy system because, look, for one, they're an island, right? They're going to be one of the first to feel the dramatic effects of climate change. So a lot of these islands are like, hey, no, we're right in the path of this thing. Iceberg dead ahead. We need to modernize our systems. We're going to modernize, but not only that, yes, we need money, but not only do we need that, but we also need the bigger countries to step up and do their part as well, because it's actually you guys that are driving climate change the most. The United States, China, and India. And so, look, man, we need to do something about that. And so this is part of that plan. Now, there's more. Sanders' plan also calls for a moratorium on any new nuclear energy plants and would rule out geoengineering the climate or deploying technologies to capture carbon dioxide from fossil fuel plants. So that's carbon capture and sequestration, right? So that's something that a lot of people are like, hey, man, look, we can't really do anything because we got to burn fossil fuels. But why don't we just capture the carbon and then stick it underground? Well, that technology has actually been incredibly difficult to perfect, right? And so Bernie Sanders, he says, look, that's not going to work. That's not a good solution. Let's just not create the carbon in the first place so that, first off, we don't have to figure out how to capture it and continue to spend all this money on the carbon capture technology and also figure out where to store the carbon under the earth. So let's just not deal with all that and invest in clean energies. Makes sense, right? So the nuclear plant thing. Now, one thing I disagree with the plan on is the stance on nuclear, right? I'm a little bit more friendly to nuclear power than most liberals, and I've been upfront about that because it doesn't create emissions. It does create waste, and there is an issue with that. But there's also new technologies, and I think we need to look into those new technologies that do not create waste when it comes to nuclear energy. So I guess a moratorium on any of these fission plants. Okay, I'll accept that as long as we can continue looking into safer nuclear options. And I know a lot of you might think that it's nuclear. There is no safe option. I think that there is. I think we should look into other stuff. What is it? Liquid salt and the thorium reactors, things like that. But again, we can have a disagreement on that. But I'd be okay with seeing that still in our energy mix. But if we can get most of our or all of our energy from wind and solar and geothermal energy sources, well, then I guess that wouldn't bother me too, as long as we have a reduction in emissions. And that's what's important here, right? So now, super ambitious, right? Well, there's more. As much as, just like many of others, Bernie Sanders' plans happen to include things that are connected, right? And his Green New Deal plan actually looks and goes into the economy and doesn't just look at how we generate energy, but who's generating the energy and what we can do for those workers who will be displaced. In fact, the plan, which comes the same week as the campaign released its proposal to boost unions, promises 5 years of unemployment insurance, a wage guarantee, housing assistance, job training, pension support, and priority job placement for all workers displaced by this transition. So, coal miners, you are a priority. Workers on an oil rig, you are the priority here. People who work in oil and gas, every one of you is going to have a backup and is going to be retrained and is going to get benefits to be able to survive the transition, feed your families, and then get into a new industry. That's pretty good. It does not leave anyone behind. That's great. Now, it also offers early retirement support for those who choose or can no longer work, right? So, retirement plan, that's amazing. So, the main question, of course, is that how are you going to pay for it? Now, personally, I think that if we don't do this, it's going to be a much, much higher cost. But nonetheless, just like all other Sanders plans, it does come with a plan on how to pay for it. In fact, they start by saving a total of $1.2 trillion from scaling back military spending on protecting global sources of oil. So that, of course, means no more, basically protecting some of these countries in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, because of our agreement to get cheap oil. So no more wasting military resources on wars for oil. That's amazing. That's huge. Nobody else talks about this. Nobody else has talked about we should reduce our reliance on foreign oil and our military from having to defend those foreign sources of oil. I mean, again, I have not seen this anywhere. Now, it also adds, or they also save $1.3 trillion from federal and state welfare due to the creation of millions of good paying unionized jobs. It's about 20 million jobs that they say will be created by the Green New Deal. Then they say they're going to earn money, $6.4 trillion from selling electricity produced by the Energy Department's regional power marketing authorities, $3 trillion from making the fossil fuel industry pay for pollution through litigation fees and taxes, and eliminating federal fossil fuel subsidies. So what we see here from this plan is a complete destruction of the fossil fuel industry. I am not going to cry about that. I'm not going to be upset about that at all. Now, $2.3 trillion of how to pay for it would come from income taxes on the 20 million new jobs that the plan creates, additional $2 trillion from forcing the wealthy and large corporations to pay their fair share. Damn. They're taking it to it. You want to know how they're going to pay for it? That's how. Now, of course, look, a lot of the numbers that we've heard about this is a $16.3 trillion plan, right? Now, the right wing has already, based on no evidence, nothing whatsoever, claimed that Green New Deal is going to cost $83 trillion. That's insane. They made it up. No, it's going to cost $16.3 trillion, and we're going to end up having a stable climate with a well-paid workforce. It's a win-win. Now, you compare that to the catastrophic, the cost of the catastrophic climate change that is coming, which would be about $70.4 trillion by 2100 in just damage. That's huge. That's bigger than the global economy by several times. So, look, that's the costs for not doing anything. Now, you do something about it, you do this plan, according to the policy memo, it would pay for itself over the next 15 years. Well, now that's an investment I can get behind. Experts, they said, have scored the plan and its economic effects. Now, the plan gets pretty specific as well on where exactly the money will go. Let me give you a couple of examples here. There will be $5.9 billion for regional economic development plans, with $2.5 billion going right to Appalachia, right to the coal miners. So those are the coal miners in places like West Virginia. That money, a lot of it goes right for them. There's actually $15 billion allocated for the coal miners' Black Lung Disability Fund. Another $25 billion goes to clearing the national park maintenance backlog. And there would also be a civilian conservation corps that would get $171 billion. Now, the Civilian Conservation Corps actually was a New Deal program that planted 3 billion trees in the 1930s. They're going to bring that back. So now it helps Appalachia, but what about racial justice, right? Well, it turns out there's racial justice in this plan as well. It actually calls for an Office of the Civil Rights at the Environmental Protection Agency, at the EPA, and vows to give minority and women-owned businesses, cooperatives, and employee-owned firms priority when it comes to federal contracts. So they're promoting minority-owned businesses. It also promises to adhere to the principles of environmental justice set out at the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit back in 1991 and abide by the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So also helping people like Standing Rock, Native Americans. So that's amazing. So look, there's all sorts of things in this. It's an incredibly long, detailed piece of legislation that is set up to. I mean, look, when he talks about transformation and transforming our energy system, he's not kidding. This is a complete and total transformation of our energy system. So now, going into it, the focus will be first on making sure that everyone is protected, that everyone has a safety net before we have that massive transition. Because I know it's pretty scary, right? So now, the program would establish a special office of climate. That's climate resiliency. That's just for disabled people, right? The first 2 years will be spent aggressively laying down a social safety net, the proposal says. They said because this plan is so comprehensive in ensuring we solve the climate crisis, we must prioritize establishing a social safety net in the first years of the implementation of this plan. So to make sure, of course, that people, thanks to this overhaul, right, might lose their jobs, will be covered, will be protected, will be able to feed their families, etc. So that's big. There's a lot here. And there's more than, of course, I've already talked about. It's very comprehensive. So now that Governor Inslee, by the way, has dropped out of the presidential race, right? He was the guy who was the climate guy. Right? Well, now, shouldn't Bernie Sanders get that mantle? I think he should. Not only are there bold proposals inside of this, but also massive worker protections, new offices, programs, etc. This is the boldest plan that I've seen out of any candidate. Now, Republicans, of course, are going to scream, right? They're going to scream. Corporate Democrats will say it's unrealistic. But here's my thoughts on that. We are facing an unprecedented crisis in human history. Our society, we don't know it. We don't see it. Or maybe some of us do, right? But our society is on the brink of a massive climate breakdown. And that's a disaster. And I think unprecedented problems require unprecedented solutions. Because if we don't solve this, then we're not going to have an economy or a society. So we've got to figure this thing out, and we have to do it now. And I think Bernie Sanders' plan is the best that I've seen. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.